Alright, let's now actually work with streams. And again, starting by creating a new file. Alright, now let's say that for some reason in our application, we need to read a large text file from the file system and then send it to the client. So how would we do that? Well, there are multiple ways, and we're going to explore a few of them, starting with the most basic one and moving all the way to the best way of doing this. Okay, so the first thing is to require the file system package, just like before, and also the HTTP module. Let me now show you a nice trick. So let's actually create a server like this. So require the HTTP package, and then from here we can right away call create server. So just like this. Okay, so the result of requiring HTTP is the HTTP object, and on there we can then use create server just like this and then save it into a variable. So that is yet another way of creating a new server with writing even a bit less code. Okay, and so just like before, let's now listen to the request event and specify our callback here. So the first solution that we're going to use is the easiest and most straightforward one, which is to simply read the file into a variable and then once that's done, send it to the client in a way that we already know how to do it. So that one's very simple. And let me write a comment here for that. So solution 1. And so fs.read file, then our test file again. And then once that's ready, we call our callback function in which we have access to the data. But first, let's handle the error. So for example, in case that the file does not exist, and in that case we simply log the error to the console. But otherwise, we simply send this data back to the client. So we use the response object just like we did before many times, and then .end and the data. So give it a save. And so that is the first and the simplest solution, right? But before we can test this, we need to actually also start a server, right? So we use listen to do that. And the port, the same one as before. Then localhost and our callback function. Okay, so let's see if this actually works. And of course not, because I actually didn't even start the application. So now it says listening, and now let's see what happens here. And here we go. So this file is huge. It has Node.js is the best written in it, like 10,000 times or something. And so it takes a lot of time until it loads entirely. And we're not really interested in loading everything. So let's stop this here and go back to our code. So this works just fine, the solution 1 that we have here in this case, but the problem is that with this solution, Node will actually have to load the entire file into memory, because only after that's ready, it can then send that data. Now this is a problem when the file is big, and also when there are a ton of requests hitting your server, because the Node process will very quickly run out of resources, and your app will quit working, everything will crash, and your users will not be happy, believe me. So this solution here does work when we're just creating something small locally for just ourselves, for example, but in a production-ready application, you cannot use a piece of code like this. Okay, so let's move on to our second solution. And in that solution, we will actually use streams. Okay, so let's comment out this part and move on to solution number 2. And the idea here is that we actually don't really need to read this data from the file into a variable, right? We don't need this variable. So instead of reading the data into a variable and having to store that variable into memory, we will just create a readable stream. Then as we receive each chunk of data, we send it to the client as a response, which is a writable stream, remember. So let me now show you how we can use streams. So we create a variable. Let's call it readable here. And then from the file system again, we use create read stream. Just like this. Then this, of course, small. And now the name of the file that we're trying to read. So that is again testfile.txt. Okay, perfect. So this now creates a stream from the data that is in this text file, which we can then consume piece by piece, so chunk by chunk. And how do we do that? Well, remember from the last lecture that each time there is a new piece of data that we can consume, a readable stream emits the data event. Okay? And so we can listen to that just like we learned in the events lecture. So readable.on data, and then our callback function. And in that callback function, we have access to that piece of data, so to that chunk. Let me call it chunk here in our callback function. And so now we can handle this piece of data. And what we're going to do with this piece of data, with this chunk, is to actually write it to a writable stream, which is the response. So response.write this chunk. Okay? So again, remember that the response is a writable stream. So just as I mentioned in the previous video, right? And so we can now use the write method to send every single piece of data into that stream. Okay? And so with this, effectively, we're streaming the content from the file right to the client. Okay? You understand the difference? So before, we read everything at once into a variable, and once that was ready, we then send that entire piece of data back to the client. But in this situation with the stream, it is different. We're effectively streaming the file. So we read one piece of the file, and as soon as that's available, we send it right to the client using the write method of the response stream. Then when the next piece is available, then that piece will be sent, and all the way until the entire file is read and streamed to the client. Okay? Now, just to finish, we also have to handle the event when all the data is read. So when the stream is basically finished reading the data from the file. So in that case, the end event will be emitted. And so as soon as that happens, what we're going to do is to do res.end. Okay? And we used this one before. So calling end on the response. We did that before, right? And now it makes actually more sense. Because again, the response is also a stream. And the end method signals that no more data will be written to this writable stream. Okay? So up here, all we did was actually use response.end with the data in it. So we did no streaming, all we did was in the end to send some data. Now in this case, we're not passing anything into this end method because we already sent all the data using res.write chunk by chunk. And so when the readable stream is finished reading its file, well, all we have to do is to then signal that we're ready using res.end like this. Okay? So we always need to use this data and this end event here, one after another like this. Because otherwise, the response will actually never really be sent to the client. Okay? So without this piece here, this entire solution would not really work. Okay? So let's now close this one, start again, and read again. And so you see that it's actually working again. Okay? Now, this time without the problems that we had with the first solution. Let's stop this here and go back to our code, because I want to show you now that there is another event that we can listen to on a readable stream, which is the error event. So readable.error, and in this callback function, we have access to the error object. Okay, so in this case, we will log this error to console and then send the result of file not found. And we can also set the status code to an error, so 500, for example. So usually it's automatically set to 200, which means okay, but in this case we have a server error, which means that we want to send back the code 500. All right. So let's now, or actually I need to quit this again. So let's see what happens now. Oh, we already have an error right here. Rest.status is not a function. And yeah, actually it's status code. So this is the way that you write it in Express. So I'm already used to writing Express so much. So Express is a Node.js framework, which we're going to use in the rest of the course. And in Express you do it like this. And so that was the problem. So I'm already a bit too used to writing Express. So let's go back. And yeah, so now we see file not found. And if we open up the DevTools, you see our 500 error code that we just sent before. And if we go to our network tab, let's try that again. You have the status code here as well. So just like we saw in one of the previous videos, in another section actually. So this is how we can inspect this kind of stuff in the network tab. All right. So let's fix it here, give it a save. And okay. So this again works just perfectly, but there still is a problem with this approach that I just showed you. And the problem is that our readable stream, so the one that we're using to read the file from the disk, is much, much faster than actually sending the result with the response writable stream over the network. And this will overwhelm the response stream, which cannot handle all this incoming data so fast. And this problem is called back pressure. And it's a real problem that can happen in real situations. So in this case, back pressure happens when the response cannot send the data nearly as fast as it is receiving it from the file. Does that make sense? So we have to fix that solution and come up with a even better one. And so we will create solution 3. And that is actually the final one. Okay, so no more solutions than 3. So the secret here is to actually use that pipe operator that I mentioned in the last video. Okay, so the pipe operator is available on all readable streams, and it allows us to pipe the output of a readable stream right into the input of a writable stream. Okay, and that will then fix the problem of back pressure, because it will automatically handle the speed, basically, of the data coming in and the speed of the data going out. Okay, so let's actually get our readable stream here. Okay, so that is our readable stream, and now all we have to do is to take our readable stream, use the pipe method on it, and then put in a writable stream. And that is the response. And that's actually it. That's all we have to do for this solution. Okay, so it always works like this. Let me write it out here as a comment. So we need a readable source, basically. Okay, so again, this is just to explain it to you. Then we can use the pipe on it, and here we will have to put a writable destination. So this is where our data comes from, and it has to be a readable stream, and that data we can then pipe into a writable destination. So in this case, our destination is the response, okay? Now this stream here can actually be a duplex or a transform stream as well, but what matters is that we can write to the stream. And response, of course, is such a stream. So we can, of course, write to the response that will be sent to the client, okay? So the pipe operator automatically solves the problem of back pressure that we had previously. And it's also actually a much more elegant and straightforward solution. So what we did here before was just to show you all the ways in which we can use the stream methods and events in order to create this kind of solution. And of course, they have many use cases, but in a problem like this, the pipe operator is actually the best solution. Behind the scenes, it does something like this here actually, but again, in a much more straightforward way for us to write, because it handles all this stuff internally behind the scenes. So I believe that pipe here is actually the easiest way of consuming and writing streams, unless, of course, as I mentioned, we need a more customized solutions. And then we have to use these more complicated tools like these events and methods that I showed you before. All right, so just to finish, let's quit the process here, start it again, and of course see if it still works, which it does. And so our work is done here. So we're finished with this lecture and ready to go straight to the next one.